Welcome to Makers and Mystics, the podcast for art-driven seekers of truth and lovers of life. I'm Stephen Roach, and I invite you to join me as we explore the intersections of creativity, faith, and the human experience. Jon, it's an honor to have you with me today on the Makers and Mystics podcast. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
You know, this season on the podcast, I'm going to dive right into the deep end. Is that good?
Love it.
We've been talking a lot about flow and how to find creative flow. And we've been talking to different artists from different backgrounds about what creative flow looks like in your creative process. And I'd love just out of the gate to know, how do you find creative flow in your life? What gets you out of your ordinary mindset and into a creative headspace?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm at this stage of life where, finding what used to give me flow was quiet space, early mornings. And that's just harder to come by. I've got a 3-month-old at home and a 5-year-old at home. And I'm renting this little spot from my neighbor. It's a little cottage casita here in her backyard. And so I get a little bit of that. But I'm finding that flow is kind of like the little lizards that me and my 5-year-old try to catch in our backyard. So we've got these tiny little baby lizards. I mean, they're not like iguanas, but I know no other kind. So let's call it a baby iguana. Let's say it's a baby iguana in our backyard, and it's hanging out on a tree, and my daughter spots it. And if we're very careful, we can get within maybe, I don't know, like a 1.5 feet from it before it scurries off. But you have to be very gentle, very careful. And I feel like flow for me these days is that. It's kind of this sense, this feeling, okay, something is kind of rising up in me, and I'm being carried away by some current right now. Maybe I'm at the piano and, we've just finished dinner and my daughter is occupied in the living room with her horses, and my wife is feeding our baby. And there's this window before we do dishes, before we do bedtime, and I'm just at the piano, and maybe I find some chords that just kind of light something up in me. Then I'm like, okay, this is a moment. I'll turn the little light on, and I'll just kind of try to disappear. And those moments are very hard these days, but when they come, you have to kind of capture them. And try not to just assume it'll be there when you come back, because that's not always the case.
Yeah, and inspiration really doesn't seem to consider convenience, does it?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. In fact, I almost feel like part of the inconvenience, that's maybe part of the magic recipe, because when I'm thinking about writing something or making a record, I see it as kind of like, when you're making a sculpture is a 3-dimensional process. And with music making, we like to think of it as like this linear process, because often, I'm working in Pro Tools or whatever. And, but a song is really 3-dimensional. And so the way you get around, the way you get the prismatic vision of the song is by listening and approaching it in inconvenient times, frankly.
Yes.
In the car, in the shower, wherever you're kind of not at your desk, whatever you're just like try to maybe when you're exhausted, when you're really caffeinated, like how does it feel in all those, then you can get a better sense of what it is. So inconvenience I found is like, oh great, here we go. Here's a song. It's the most inconvenient time. Here we go. Here's an idea,
Right. It's almost like we have to learn how to exist in 2 places at once on some level. It's like we have to be present, and we have to be fully present, with our family, with what we have going on in front of us. But at the same time, we always have to leave one little tab open for those moments so that we can capture the lizard on the tree. And it's almost like we have to sneak up on inspiration, like you were saying. There was a poet, I can't remember her name. I'll think of it later, but she talked about some of her poems poems, she had to sneak up on them and grab them by the tail, or she had to grab it by the end of the poem and bring it back. And so she almost, she described her process as almost creating in reverse, you know?
That strikes me as so accurate.
Well, man, I'm excited because you just put out a new album that I've really been enjoying, and I'd love to know about your creative process on producing this one. Where did this idea start? The name of the album is Jesus. Very straightforward, simply said. Talk to me about this record.
It was kind of started out as a personal project of wanting to be reacquainted with the person of Jesus. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, Hispanic pastor of Hispanic congregations my whole life. But I've grown up with these stories. You know, I grew up, I didn't quite understand the kind of coming to faith element for a very long time because it was just always assumed. And I actually don't think that was a bad thing. I think that was, I'm so grateful that my imagination from a very early age was colored with the reality of the spiritual world. But the person of Jesus in recent years, for a million and one reasons, had almost become a caricature. And I think that's what Christ becomes if we're not actively looking at Christ. I think there's almost like you're either looking at the reality, or you're kind of being, your imagination is being deformed. Just because the world we live in is there's constant, there's constant intrusions upon our imagination. There's constant people taking the name of Christ and owning it and making it some kind of like figurehead for some movement. And it's very easy to just think, oh yeah, I know that guy. He's not like that. Maybe he's like that. Okay, sweet. He says he's a Christian. Okay, I check on a box. But reading through the Gospels, you find a very controversial figure. He's challenging. He's comforting, but he's also challenging. He resisted being put into a box all over the Gospels, and he still resists it today. So it was really like a personal, man, I want to be reminded of who this person is. And then these little song fragments started popping up, these little tunes, these little kind of ditties. And I had probably like 4 or 5 of them before I even realized, oh, this might be this might be the next project for me. And then I tried something different with this album. I tried to have it all live in my head before I had it live in my voice memos or in a recording. So for 2 reasons. Number one, it was the Christian tradition was an oral tradition for a very long time, for many, many people, over 1,000 years. These are stories being passed down. And I kind of thought, man, I wanted melodies around these words to be orally adhesive. And then 2, I saw Paul McCartney in some interview that I was, watching at some point say that, well, yeah, me and Paul, it's probably like everyone's heard it now. Me and John, we never wrote anything down because we figured if we didn't remember it by the time we got into the studio, then the audience isn't going to remember it anyway. And I thought, oh, that's a cool little, just structure to put on. And so I didn't record any of it till I had like 10 or 11 songs. And I just, tried to remember the words. And a lot of it is scripture anyway, so it wasn't that hard. But and then I kind of recorded it pretty quickly after that.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, a lot of the lyrics on the album really move between scripture and then some of your own personal experience, very day to day, very grounded in the present moment lyric. And I love that juxtaposition between the two. How did that work out in your process? How did you move between singing the scripture straightforward and then bringing your own personal life experience in the middle of that?
I just tried to sort of keep the energy of the words alive. The reason I even started singing any of the particular songs was because those phrases felt very alive to me, and so a melody just sort of came. But if you keep singing the words as they're written in scripture, it sort of becomes like hokey. It sort of becomes like pageantry or something, like the musical version of watching like an Easter pageant or something, which isn't necessarily always bad, but it's not what I'm aiming for. I wasn't aiming for just scripture songs. I was aiming for songs that would put us in contact with the energy that I find in reading the Gospels. And the way that I did that was, really internalizing that energy and then trying to let it kind of metabolize into my own words and my own story, and then spitting that out. And, sometimes it was very vulnerable. Sometimes it was just, a very honest reaction to it. And I think, that is, how we're meant to engage with the Bible and meant to engage with religion in general. It's not meant to be, there is part of religion that, whatever religio, whatever means in Latin, I forget, but it's something about like forming. It's something about you do this thing and it turns you into this thing, which I'm very much a believer in, being somebody who, enjoys running and enjoys, it's like we are creatures that can be formed, and that's just a fact of who we are, and that happens with our spirits as well. But if we're not actively bringing ourselves to bear, then it's kind of like being in a marriage and never talking about any of the issues for like a decade. And then after a decade goes by, then suddenly there's like, well, who are you? I don't even know you. You haven't really talked for 10 years. I think that happens to a lot of people's faith. They're like,
Yeah.
well, I don't really know if I believe this or I don't know. It's like, well, actually that happened a long time ago. Like now we're just talking about the results of that. And so, for me, that's always been kind of, I've always just wanted to be honest in that way in a song, because we're meant to be truth tellers, as artists.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, I want to go back to something you said earlier because it ties in with what you just now said. You talked about the imagination being deformed, and how almost an overfamiliarity is the way that I heard you saying that with the gospel, or an overfamiliarity with the stories within the scripture. It can deform the imagination. And then obviously a lot of things, we're in a very visual culture. There are a lot of things that want to form our imagination or deform our imagination. But what does informing the imagination, or, spiritual formation, what does transformation of the imagination look like for you? And how does your art and your music play into that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the imagination is, if it's not the most important aspect of a person as it regards to faith, I would be hard pressed for someone to make an argument to me that there is another part of our personhood that is more important. For this reason, one of the most radical, transgressive premises of Christianity is that we are creatures that exist on two landscapes. We're material creatures and we're spiritual creatures. And a premise of Christianity is that the spiritual landscape is as real as tables and chairs, and that in that landscape, there isn't just a bunch of stuff, but there's actually a who, there's a person. And we are creatures that exist on both landscapes. And first of all, that is wild, because we don't live in a world that takes that as an assumption, as like a priori knowledge anymore. The second thing that Christianity presupposes is that this entire thing is somehow organized towards love, and that human beings are made for, by, through, to love. And these are like wildly, like if you really think about what this means for civilization, for politics, it's just a wild premise. And I don't know how you go through your life believing that without having an imagination that is alive, or that is lit by stories, that is lit by feelings that have been informed by the truth of the spiritual world, and the fact that there is someone on the other side who is love, who is pulling us in this direction. And the pull is so strong that for thousands upon thousands of years, human beings have been looking towards the heavens, and not just saying, oh, wow, that's cool, but looking towards the heavens and worshiping. I mean, worship is not this passive. Worship is a wild thing that is called forth from like the depths of the soul. A.R. Ammons, the poet, who's an atheist, by the way, has this poem called "The City Limits," which I'm sure you've heard. It's a very popular poem. He goes through this whole, he talks about the city, he talks about the gold-skinned wings of the fly, he talks about the birds, and then he talks about how when you consider the radiance, how it doesn't withhold itself from any nook or cranny, any shadow or shade, any poop or whatever. When you consider that, then the heart moves roomier, and fear, this is what he says then, fear lit by the breath of such calmly turns to praise. And this is an atheist poet acknowledging that there is these moments in life when we encounter something that we can't we can't quite understand. We can't put into words. We can't. It's an experience of something that the only plausible response is praise. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself is how do you make sense of that? The only way to do that is through your imagination. I find no other way to do that than by having an active imagination that takes the stories of the Bible at their word, whether they're, I'm not even talking about literal or not, but like takes these things as like, these are the deepest truths of the deepest magic, and somehow lets that lead us, especially artists, lets that lead us into being these kind of like, holy fools of the world that are kind of saying, hey, this isn't it, we don't have to be about what everybody says you need to be about. Like there's actually something deeper, longer, wider, thicker that is the substance of life.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I want to switch gears for a few minutes because I want to chat with you about your work on Terrence Malick's film, A Hidden Life. And as we're talking about your creative process, the imagination, flow, and all the above, I'm really curious about your process in scoring for a film. And this particular film, it depicts the life of an Austrian farmer who is also a devout Catholic and who refused to fight for the Nazis in World War II, the way I understand the film. Tell me about your process in working on this film. How is this different than your normal songwriting process? And how did that visual element and that imaginative element of the film inform your work on this one?
Yeah, so my wife and I were tremendously blessed to be a part of the composition team for A Hidden Life. And our job was to do small-scale reductions of large-scale orchestral pieces. So we would take like a Bach cantata, and he would say, hey, measures 99 through 117, can you turn those 18 measures into 3 minutes of music using 3 instruments? Or he would say, I need a love theme. I need a anxiety theme, only using these few instruments. And something he would say is the music needs to steal upon the subconscious. So a lot of score these days is kind of forcing you to feel things, right? Like, boom, be scared, or be tense, with something that you've heard a million times. And it's fine. It's a form. It is what it is. But there's a different kind of storytelling that kind of draws from the more, I think, subtle movements of life as we know it, lived reality, that just has music being this kind of, you don't hear the music, but you just think you're experiencing the actor's emotion or whatever. And so the thing about that film that was both hard and eye-opening for us was Malick's process is extremely iterative. So it's not like he gives you a prompt, you do it, and it's done. It's you get a prompt, you do it, and then you do it again, and then maybe you do it 3 to 5 tempi faster, and then he would say, well, can you invert it so that it goes in reverse, and can you actually make it minor instead of major, and can you invert it and make it minor, and what if you inverted it and made it minor and made it twice as fast, but then made the lead element from the original just as slow, like things like that you're just like, okay, I'm here for it, but holy cow. And I mean, we did that for 2.5 years. We were living in Chicago at the time, and we would commute to Austin, which is where we live now. And we would work on these things for, we'd come down for about a month, and we'd work remotely. And it was just this very like, hey, I think I had a very I didn't know this, but I had a very maybe immature understanding, I think, of what I was capable of. Because until you realize, kind of like running, I don't know if anybody who's a runner knows that when you start out, you're just kind of like, I can barely make it, the half mile. And then you keep going and it's like 10 miles later, you're like, how the heck did this happen? I didn't know I was capable of this. Same thing with art. You kind of find your way, kind of pushing. And then you wake up one day and you're like, I can't believe I made that. That's insane. But it all happened in increments. And I learned that on that film, just like, okay, actually it's not the first thing. It's not even the 10th thing. Sometimes it's the 100th thing. Sometimes the 101st thing. So that was that. When I think of that film, that's what I think of, is that kind of iterative, like just doing it over and over.
I love what you're saying there, man, because often I've talked about the creative process, and if we really want to explore and hopefully arrive at, I don't want to say great art, but to arrive at something that has pushed us past the boundaries of our own abilities, it really requires not accepting the first exit ramp for an idea. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. If we get an idea, we kind of think that the original is the final product. And sometimes we have those moments. I mean, I have friends that they wrote the song in 5 minutes and they're not going to touch it. But that's kind of the unicorn, I think, in some ways, that
5-minute song probably happened after 20 years of writing songs too.
That's right. Exactly. But when we can, I think it's part of creative maturity maybe, or at least an expansive mindset, that we don't always take the first exit ramp, but we explore different iterations. We explore what would it look like if this was played in a minor key, or if we inverted it. And I think that's brilliant. But how has that informed you in your songwriting from that experience in the film? Did that carry over into, say, your new record and some of the things you're doing now?
It did, yeah. So I was working on my first record of devotional music called Keeper of Days when I was working on A Hidden Life. And so that record was definitely this like churning and continuing to flip it over. And what if I take these lyrics and make them minor? And it was kind of a rediscovery of play, frankly, because there's a reason why we play music, and we don't check music off the list or something. We do live in such a society that is kind of run by administrators. And so we kind of think that the highest possible end goal is completing something, like completing a task, which it's not bad. It's neither here nor there. But the point of, I forget who it was who called art the infinite game. The point isn't finishing. The point is just to be able to keep going. And because it's the thing itself, it's the doing of it, that's what the life is. And we have we leave these little kind of things along the way, and those are kind of the artifacts that we leave as sort of evidence that we have been on the path to begin with. But it's really the doing of it. And when you're iterating that much, and when you're not in control of when it's done, the way we were with the film, all you have is play. It's just like, oh, cool, yeah, I'll try that. That sounds fun. And then you look back, and you're like, whoa, I made a lot of stuff. And I love even now, I've got just these treasure trove of hard drives where I just look back, I'm like, I can't believe we made that. That thing's amazing. I should use that for something,
Yeah.
But just recovering, play is everything. And play is the first thing to go, unfortunately, when you make it a career, when you make it like a living, which is why I think it's wise for people not to try to rush after that, not to kind of fantasize about, doing art full time or doing art for your job. Because once it is, then you do have to start completing things. Then you do have to start looking at the metrics and blah, blah, blah. And hopefully you've built up a robust habit of play such that you know how to just like go into that mode. But sometimes you don't, and then you just burn out and you're like, well, that was terrible. I'll never do that again.
Yeah. That's amazing. You said something earlier. It made me think, flow tends to be this space between discipline and spontaneity, or flow is kind of that space between playfulness, and then again, the discipline. It's something between the challenge of it and our capabilities. And, you said earlier, when we're talking about the song written in 5 minutes, that this writer had probably had 20 years behind that moment of preparing them for that. And I think that that's another aspect of flow and of the creative process that we often overlook, is that the discipline, the 10,000 hours, as some people call it, whether that's a myth or true, who knows, but the 10,000 hours that we put in, these things are really meant to prepare us so that when those moments of play arise, we have a language, or like you said, hard drives full of material. We have a reservoir of things that we've built up over time. And I'd be curious to know, for you, do you feel like the work that you were doing all those years ago still plays into what you're creating now, or how have you evolved as an artist?
Definitely. The work that we did for that film definitely has, I see everything as that gets put into the bucket of possibilities. And we even moved to Austin to work on the following film. So we're still kind of working on that. But I remember freshman year of college, I took a music theory class, and the professor opened with this analogy that I've never forgotten. He said, all of you are here because you were given a bucket, and we're going to call it your creative bucket. In that bucket are all your experiences, all your feelings, all your talent that you currently have, all the chords that all, blah, blah, blah. This is the bucket that you came into this class with. The point of this class is not for you to get rid of that bucket. I want you to keep that bucket. But the point of this class is for me to give you a second bucket. And in this second bucket, I'm going to teach you the circle of fifths. I'm going to teach you, changing keys in a natural way in a Baroque manner. I'm going to teach you figured bass. I'm going to teach you all these things that you probably think this has nothing to do with the bucket that I came in with. Why aren't you helping me with this bucket? And he says, don't worry, just stick with it, because one day you're going to pull something out of this creative bucket that you put into this other bucket. And it's going to feel very natural, and you're not even going to know how it happened, but it's going to happen, and you're going to be really glad that I gave you this second bucket. And I thought that was the most brilliant way to kind of describe how our experiences, how our experiments, how our trial and errors, how our blind alleys, how our talent and fundamental in learning, how that all affects the creative life. Because we really can't help but pull from this bucket, I think. At least if we're doing things that are inspired, I think they're always coming from this like mysterious, very spiritual place, and everything informs that. And this is why I don't think it's, especially if you're, in your 20s, even early 30s, I'm always, telling artists at that age, just try something, just do it. It doesn't matter if you're getting paid. Like, you can work at a coffee shop, but if you have an opportunity to volunteer for somebody, or to intern, or to, I'm going to go to England and busk for 6 months. Like, just do it. Like, this is the time for you to play and just to try things. It doesn't matter if you are, if you're not Ed Sheeran by the time you're 25, who cares? He's literally the only one like that. And it's great. And we love it. But it's like, you be you and get your experiences. And in one day, you're going to see, how that, I worked at a jingle house for 2 years. And it was like, what am I doing here? It was awesome in a lot of ways, but it was also like, this is the furthest thing from the thing I thought I was going to be doing in music. But here I am. But it was the biggest training in, first of all, like music production, and just learning to understand pop and melodies and why they do this and that. And, so you just never know. You never know how your experiences are going to play into that first bucket.
Yeah. I love that. imagery of the two buckets and how they work together over time. And I also love what you just now said about, don't worry if you're not Ed Sheeran by this particular age. That's something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, is how, especially in America, there's almost this idolatry of youth, this idealism that, the 27 club, if I haven't made it by, 27, then what is life? And I just think that's such a destructive ideology, some of a lot of the ancient cultures really, indigenous cultures value the wisdom of the elders and value the expansiveness of a life devoted to a particular craft. And, I'm hoping to see that mindset shift in culture. And, I've been pursuing the creative path in my own life all of my life, and I hope to be doing the same thing for all of life. But I had to work through some of that idealism in my own life about, what we think it's going to look like. You're talking about, I worked for this jingle company for a number of years, but what does that look like for you? How have you wrestled with that in your own life and in your own expectations? And how do you keep yourself inspired, when maybe some of your own imaginings or some of your own aspirations and the exterior world don't always line up? How do you reconcile those things?
Yeah, I think you have to be honest about your own disappointments, first of all. I think you have to, the temptation is to just kind of shove it away and pretend like, oh, it's fine, or to be mastered by it, to be like, well, this is the all-defining reality of who I am and what I'm going to be about. I've not made it by 27. I've not died, and I've not, I'm not the Beatles. I haven't done my things by the time I'm whatever. And the sooner you can kind of address that, identify the disappointment, and then just say, even as simple as like, yeah, that does suck. I wish I was more talented, or I wish I could have been more successful early on, because it's really hard to be an artist still trying to do it at this age. Like that, again, that's soil out of which your next thing might grow, because again, it's the infinite game. It's you get to actually, if you believe this is something that you are meant to do with your life, and the kind of person that you're meant to be, somebody who is an artist, who is creative, who responds to the world and maybe notices beauty in a deeper way and wants to participate in that, then that is a call. That's a call to a kind of life. It's not a call to success, a kind of commercial success. It's a call to a kind of life. And that life is open to you, and that life is available to you wherever you are. And it's going to be extremely hard, and it's going to take everything from you, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and you're probably not going to be as rich as your friends who just were accountants or whatever by the time, because these things, they are diverging paths. But it's absolutely worth it to be the kind of person that you were always meant to be, and to be able to see the vistas that you were always meant to see. It's like that call is a call towards it's a call towards beauty. It's a call towards relishing the beauty at a particular moment in space and time that you maybe can scarcely even imagine right now, but the life is pulling you towards it. And there's those moments, I know you know what I'm talking about. It's like those moments where you're like, it was all worth it. It's like,
yes,
whether you're making something, or maybe it's a performance, or maybe you're feeling a connection with a group of people, or you're just doing the thing and you're like, I can't believe I get to do this. Those moments is like, that is confirmation that all the money in the world can't get you that,
right.
All the success in the world can't get you that. That comes from just being aligned with your calling. And but that's a constant, I could ask you the same question. How do you keep that top of mind? We're both, I wouldn't say we're old. We're both not young. Okay. And, at least by society standards. And, so it is it's a different beast right now, because we're just like, no, we're doing the thing that we're probably going to do for a long time. This is the thing. So, how do you keep that top of mind?
No, that's great. I think in my own life, I'm kind of like Doctor Who because I've gone through all these different incarnations in the life of Stephen Roach. You know, there were a number of years in my life when I toured as a professional musician with the band Songs of Water, performed in a lot of different places. We still create music, for commercial licensing and things like that, but that moved into community leading, and then that moved into the podcasting, and now it's into book writing. So there have been a lot of stages for me. And I think that what has kept me going through that is, and I wrote about this in the book Naming the Animals, and it's funny because you've mentioned soil several times throughout our conversation, and it's like all of the dead things from the past, they kind of go into the soil and they become nutrients for the future. And it's like the same passion that I felt for touring as a musician. The van life had an expiration date for me.
Yeah. Same.
But the same passion that went into that is now being poured into, the book writing that I'm doing and the community building that we're doing with the Breath and the Clay. But I think what sustains that is just an incessant curiosity. I think that it's almost like rather than, and this has taken me a long time to get to, but rather than looking at my art or the things that I'm doing creatively as what am I going to gain from this? It's more about what do I have to offer from this, and so it kind of it turns it from
awesome.
What I need from this to what have I been given to steward with this. You know what I mean? And so it's Beautiful. A bit of a mindset shift for me that turns it away from career or ideas of success and more so of like how can I invest this back into the soil of the culture around me, and then, like I said, just staying curious.
I mean, no, that one question that my wife and I have been asking ourselves for a long time, that's kind of a diagnostic for big decisions in our life, is what is it that we think we're meant to contribute to the world? Do you think you're meant to contribute number one hit songs? Maybe that might be what you're meant to contribute. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not that, And that's a very liberating question because it's like, it just reminded me because you said when you think of what I'm meant to offer, what is the gift here versus what I'm getting? It actually requires sometimes more courage to answer that question and to say yes to that than one would imagine. Speaking from experience, I never thought I would be doing Christian music, would be one. And I certainly never thought I would be writing music that was as directly scriptural and spiritual, like combining these two things that are deep loves of mine. I never thought it would be so, this is what Jon Guerra is about. I didn't listen to a ton of Christian music. The worship music thing didn't really click for me when I was in, high school and college. I didn't go to the conference. Like, it just wasn't, I was more into the post-rock, Radiohead, Sigur Rós.
Yes.
And then composers, John Tavner, and then kind of the artists, like the Bjorks, in my mind, I thought, oh, this is the gold standard. In many ways, they still are. Like, I still kind of, especially when I'm feeling sad, I go watch Bjork videos and I just warm myself by her fire,
Yes.
But realizing that, because of my experience, because of my parents, because of my love, because of my training, because of I happen to have a knack for this, like, this actually is the thing I'm meant to contribute to the world. And there's actually great satisfaction in that, trying to figure out how to actually make sense of the things that I love, and spirituality and
Yes.
The love of God. And that has been a great invitation to a life that had you asked me when I was 19, I'd be like, not a chance, not a chance.
Right, right. But honestly, man, I think that that's one reason why I really identify with your music and why I really appreciate the music that you're crafting. I think my approach to music has been very similar in some ways, and the faith element of your work feels very natural. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of this is what I'm supposed to sing about or what I'm supposed to write about. It feels very much a part of the creative process. And so I just want to encourage you that comes
Thanks,
through the
man.
music, for
I'm
someone
so
that,
glad.
I have often struggled with the Christian industrial complex when it comes to the arts and things of that nature, not to throw shade on anybody, but,
Mhm.
it's something I wanted to comment on, just talking about what are we meant to contribute. A few years ago, I kind of identified 3 core longings that I feel like exist at the heart of the artist. I'd love to get you to speak into this as we close up. And I think that we all, on some level or another, we have a need to belong. We have a need for that community aspect. We also have a need to be our own individual person, to be known for who we are. This is our story. This is where we've come from. So there is an immediate tension in the heart of the artist, between a need to be an individual and a need to belong. And then the third thing that I recognized is a need to make a significant contribution. And I think that sometimes that can get diluted into a pursuit of fame because we think that's where, that significant contribution will be validated. But there's a need behind the need, or a desire behind the desire. And I think it is to know that our work matters, that what we're doing makes a difference in the world. And I wonder if you resonate with those 3 thoughts there, and if you have any comments on that.
I think that's wonderful. I think that's brilliant. It's so clear. I resonate so deeply with the need for belonging, the need to be an individual, and the need to feel like what I'm doing matters. I mean, that really, and in many ways, as you're saying them, they do seem to feed into each other. I think of my closest friends here in Austin. When I was working on the Jesus record, before I recorded any of it, I brought them they came over to my house, and my 2 friends and then my wife sat behind me while I kind of played through all the songs that I had on the piano. And that night that could have been it for me. I could have just, I did it, it was done. But I felt so like these are my people after that, because I shared what I had made and they received it so warmly and were engaging. And we all as artists, I think, need friends who can understand what we're trying to do and help us along the way, even if they're not musicians themselves. And so that was tremendously important to me. But then also the piece about the individuality. I think that's, for many ways, being an individual almost necessitates belonging to a group. And that group doesn't always look like the most sexy group in the world, and in fact, oftentimes it doesn't. Oftentimes, it's you are meant to be the one version of you. You're not meant to be, it's like, I think we have sometimes a fantasy of kind of like maybe the expats in France or something in the 1920s, where it's Hemingway and it's, these people, Fitzgerald. And occasionally that happens, and you do have friendships that are like that. But more often it's like, okay, it's my buddy who works in, who's a plumber or who's an electrician, my other buddy who kind of works in tech, other guy who knows what he's doing this week. Last week it was this week it's something, and then maybe another buddy who's in film. But it's or if you're a Christian, your church, and it's like, these people drive me crazy. It's like the church seems to collect just people like you and me, people that are weird and strange, and sometimes giving yourself to those communities that you're like, I never thought I would, is actually what gives you the sense of belonging, what makes you feel like an individual, because you probably are the only one like you like that. and are the ones at the end of the day who are going to be receiving the thing that you are meant to contribute.
Yes. I love it, man. I love it. So beautifully said. I think, that's one of our hopes in the Breath in the Clay community and on the Makers and Mystics podcast is to create a space where so many diverse backgrounds and viewpoints can come together around a few common threads that happen to be the creative life and, the spiritual life. And, I have really been inspired by your work in both of those realms, both in the spiritual thread in your music, as well as the musicianship that I hear in the work you're creating. And so, Jon, I really appreciate you joining me today for the show, and I hope we get to connect again in the future.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on Makers and Mystics. Be sure to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends. We'll see you again soon, and until then, keep creating. The world needs your art.